Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. Let's keep week 16 going with today's Tolkien Tuesday. Now, the last two series, that's 15 weeks so far, have been a lot of fun as we've dived into the history of the publication of The Lord of the Rings, from the drama of Tolkien's attempts to get the Silmarillion published at the same time, through the final book prep, initial reviews, Tolkien's own look back, sales of the book, early fan letters, and more. And today, we finally wrap it up with a bit of a discussion on translations. But first, I want to play a little audio clip. This is actually the theme music from that 1955 BBC Radio Third adaptation of The Fellowship of the Ring that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. A big hat tip to Trotter for providing a link to this audio. It is a shame that this is literally all of what remains of that adaptation today. Now, finally, before I dive into this week's Tolkien Tuesday, today is the day that the book Sean and I wrote, Why We Love Middle-earth, is officially released. Now, here it is for those of you on YouTube. For those of you listening on podcast platforms, it is a trade paperback, about 6 inches by 9 inches, nearly 350 pages long, with a gorgeous cover from Emily Austin to go along with her gorgeous interior illustrations as well. Now, if you haven't ordered your copy, go get it. Links will be in the captions and show notes. And if you have received your copy and had a chance to read it, Sean and I would be deeply grateful for any 5-star review that you could leave for it on Amazon. Thank you. Now, let's move on to Tolkien's thoughts on the early translations of The Lord of the Rings. First, we're going to start in the letters with number 188, dated April 3rd, 1956. Now, the previous month, Allen and Unwin had informed Tolkien that an agreement was in place for a Dutch translation of The Lord of the Rings. After his publisher asked him to confirm that he was okay with this, Tolkien wrote back, agreeing, but adding, "It is, however, surely intelligible that an author, while still alive, should feel a deep and immediate concern in translation. And this one is, unfortunately, also a professional linguist, a pedantic don, who has wide personal connections and friendships with the chief English scholars of the continent. The translation of The Lord of the Rings will prove a formidable task, and I do not see how it can be performed satisfactorily without the assistance of the author. That assistance I am prepared to give, promptly, if I am consulted." Now, in a footnote to that, Tolkien explains that one of the biggest challenges facing a translator is the number of words in his works that require an understanding of older English, not to mention actual Old English. And he points out that in these spots, the author would be the most satisfactory and the quickest source of information. He goes on to talk about a past unpleasant experience, saying, "I wish to avoid a repetition of my experience with the Swedish translation of The Hobbit. I discovered that this had taken unwarranted liberties with the text and other details without consultation or approval." It's a little bit of foreshadowing, because let's just say Tolkien would continue to have bad luck with Swedish translations. Now, he wraps up the letter by saying that as frustrated as he was by that Swedish translation of The Hobbit, he guards The Lord of the Rings far more jealously. No alterations, major or minor, rearrangements or abridgments of this text will be approved by me unless they proceed from myself or from direct consultation. Never one to pull his punches, the professor. Initially, he was pretty disappointed with what he saw in the Dutch translation agreed upon by Allen and Unwin. He'd been sent a list of Dutch versions of place names and was asked to please send them back with "We trust your approval." Oh, I'm not so sure about that. Let's go to letter number 190 for more. "I hope you and the Foreign Rights Department will forgive my now at length writing to you about the Dutch translation. The matter is, to me, important. It has disturbed and annoyed me greatly, and given me a good deal of unnecessary work at a most awkward season." Well, there's a start. He goes on to argue that a translator shouldn't even try to translate nomenclature, the system of names devised by Tolkien. He suggests that had he had the Hobbit speaking a real-world language, the translator would have left the place names alone, and that here the system of names is, quote, "a more important element than in an historical novel." And here's more. "The toponymy of the Shire, to take the first list, is a parody of that of rural England, in much the same sense as are its inhabitants. They go together and are meant to. After all, the book is English, and by an Englishman, and presumably even those who wish its narrative and dialogue turned into an idiom that they understand will not ask of a translator that he should deliberately attempt to destroy the local color. I do not ask that of a translator. though I might be glad of a glossary where seldom the meaning of the place name is essential. And yet, an even more strong opinion follows. May I say now at once that I will not tolerate any similar tinkering with the personal nomenclature, nor with the name word hobbit. I will not have any more Hompen, in which I was not consulted. By the way, that was the Swedish translation of The Hobbit that he was upset about before. Nor any hobble or whatnot. Elves, dwarves, trolls, yes, they are mere modern equivalents of the correct terms. But hobbit and orc are of that world, and they must stay, whether they sound Dutch or not. If you think I am being absurd, then I shall be greatly distressed, but I fear not altered in my opinions. I am no linguist, but I do know something about nomenclature and have specially studied it, and I am actually very angry indeed. Woo, boy. Salty Tolkien right there. I love that. And I think I'm going to have to borrow that phrase. If you think I'm being absurd, then I shall be greatly distressed, but I fear not altered in my opinions. I think that's going to find its way into my regular vocabulary. So here's the thing. While Tolkien would eventually be satisfied with the final Dutch edition, even after all this anger, that was not the case with the Swedish translation. For this, let's look at Carpenter's biography. Not only did he disapprove of much of the actual translation, he had a working knowledge of Swedish, but he was also angered by a foreword to the book inserted by the translator. Tolkien called this foreword 5 pages of impertinent nonsense. In it, the translator interpreted The Lord of the Rings as an allegory of contemporary world politics. After Tolkien had registered a strong protest, this foreword was withdrawn by the Swedish publishers from further editions of the book. Since then, The Lord of the Rings has been translated into at least 38 different languages. Folks, thanks for joining me on this long and really initially unplanned journey into the publication of Tolkien's magnum opus over these past 16 weeks. Stay tuned for a new story that I'll tell starting in Series 3 on Tolkien Tuesdays. Please visit patreon.com/Tolkien Times to learn how you can support the show, get an ad-free feed, a monthly hangout with me, a bonus weekly episode, and a whole lot more. And finally, join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times for Word Nerd Wednesday. If you're watching this on YouTube, please be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Please follow or subscribe in your podcast apps and follow @Tolkien Times on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.